Welcome to Bucharest on day 56 and to Bucharest's version of the Arc de Triomphe, which was built in 1922 on the orders of King Ferdinand, the son of Carol I, to celebrate Romania's victory in the First World War, which she joined rather late, and she joined the Allies on the insistence of Ferdinand's wife, Elizabeth, Princess of Edinburgh, the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Ferdinand's inclinations were actually to join the war on Germany's side, but on her insistence they joined the war on the Allies' side. Fortunately for them, if only they had had the same common sense 20 years later. Well, if this isn't ironic, tell me. But in many places we've seen monuments to the Soviet liberation of countries, including Romania, and their ties to the Nazis. This is a monument in memorial to the resistance against the communists, in front of a beautiful looking hotel, which is a casino as well, decorated as such, ghastly way. But just shows you the irony of history. Leading down from the arch is this beautiful leafy boulevard, which is lined with trees and ambassadorial homes, some of which are still being used and lived in, some of them in need of renovation, but they really are magnificent. Now, I don't know who Barbu della Francia, of whom this is a statue, was 1858 to 1918, but he appears to be gazing down, a bit like the one-eyed yellow idol to the north of Kathmandu. I don't know whether he's hanging his head in shame, but talking of shame, I got to the bottom of why Ovid was exiled, or why there's a statue of Ovid in Constanta. But it's because he was exiled there. At the time it was called Tumis, because of course it was another 300 years before Constantine was in existence, and it was never really revealed exactly why he was exiled by Augustus, but it was believed that it was for some moral misdemeanor. At the time, Augustus was trying to clean up the moral compass and particularly the morals of the ruling classes in Rome, and it may have been his indulgence or adultery or something like that. He had 3 wives, so he was obviously a bit of a playboy. But anyway, for whatever sins it was, he was exiled to Tumis, which is a bit like being exiled to the Outer Hebrides or indeed the Newfoundland. Anyway, he wrote prolifically while he was there, but it didn't agree with him, and he died probably prematurely at the age of about 60. Well, look at this lovely, highly decorated example of the late Baroque. Definitely a French influence, which is typical of late Baroque architecture, but beautiful. There really are some lovely little architectural gems hidden away in this city. I can't get them all, but I can give you a few. Well, you'll remember that I mentioned Carmen Silva, the German princess from Weid in Germany, who was married to Carol I, the first King of Romania. Well, this is him, and university named after him. Very highly thought of still in Romania, Carol. His son Ferdinand, not quite so highly thought of. And Ferdinand's wife, Princess Elizabeth of Edinburgh, who I mentioned earlier, who persuaded him to join the First World War on the Allied side. She turned down the hand of the future King George V of the United Kingdom of England. Not quite sure why, but she did. Another fine example. Now I'm in the old town now, and it looks rather nice. It might be a nice place to have a bite to eat for lunch. This is worth showing you. Not only is it a beautiful little church in the middle of Bucharest, but it reinforces what I was saying about religion and Orthodox Christianity in particular being a very important part of present-day Romanian life. Every single church I've seen this morning, and I must have seen a dozen, has got services and quite a lot of people going in and out. And it's not just tourists visiting, there's hardly any tourists about. These are all local people. Well, the old town is certainly beautiful and worth a visit and a look. And just while I remember, going back to Princess Elizabeth of Edinburgh, the Queen of Ferdinand, she's actually on record through her private diaries, etc., as being a bit of a Republican, and records at one point that she didn't understand why the people put up with them. I suspect it was partly because she recognised some of the shortcomings of her husband Ferdinand, who by all accounts wasn't the brightest cookie in the jar or the best monarch. Now, this is interesting, this Baroque style building here. Now, Baroque style architecture and Rococo architecture started in Italy in a response to the austerity of the puritanical Protestant movement in the north of Europe, and it was the church's response to try and make their public buildings more attractive. And of course it caught on and spread to all parts of Europe, Moscow, and even to the New World, of course. But it looked to the classical period of Rome and Greece for its inspiration. And I wanted just to show you some of that here. Now, if you look at the two columns on either side of this window here, they are an imitation of the Doric period of Greek architecture. A plain column with a very plain footing and crown. Actual Doric columns were short and fat and tapered, but remember, this is just an imitation. Then if you look above that window to the window above it, you'll see an imitation of the Ionian period of Greek architecture, where the columns by now are getting straighter, less tapered, but the footings and the crowns are more elaborate. It looks like a sort of scroll on the top and an elaborate footing. Both columns are smooth. Now, if you look over here to the columns either side of these two windows, you'll see that they're examples or imitations of columns of the Corinthian period, where the columns themselves are not smooth, they're fluted. Proportionally they're much straighter and thinner, but the footings and the crowns are much more elaborate. It's interesting that they've incorporated all three ages of Greek architecture in this one building. It's not uncommon actually, but still interesting. This is the rather impressive boulevard which stretches down to the government parliament at the end there. And I'm going to go down and have a closer look at that in a minute. But in this direction, goes out that way. The communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu ordered the building of this parliament in the 1980s in the totalitarian neo-modernistic Kirch style, which I have to say I don't find attractive at all. I much prefer, however, the Art Deco style of these apartment blocks, which form the arch approaching the Parliament building and go down that avenue. Art Deco, of course, replaced Art Nouveau, which existed from about 1890 through to the First World War. This is interesting. This was built in 1915, but is a faithful replica of the Rodin Museum in Paris, and is built to the early Baroque style. Of course, it was the French who really took Baroque to its zenith in the late 18th century, and I suspect it was partly because they adorned their buildings both exteriorly and interiorly so extravagantly that partly led to their downfall, or the downfall of the aristocracy in France, by displaying their wealth so openly. It obviously irritated those who didn't have as much as they had, and they tore not only the aristocrats themselves down, but many of their buildings as well. And it took until very recent times for the French to start displaying their wealth exteriorly, if you went to France even 20 or 30 years ago, you would see that the outside of many buildings was very shabby, but the insides were exquisite. And that was because up until now the French have been reluctant to display their wealth. Well, this is a statue dedicated to aviators, and it's situated at Aviators Square on Aviation Boulevard, and its sculptor was a woman by the name of Lydia Kotzebue, and it was constructed in the 1930s in that 1930s sort of bold style. Ever since the modern state of Romania's origins in the back end of the 19th century, its leaders, despite their German background, have had a strong connection with France, and they were great admirers of Napoleon and great friends with Napoleon III. But quite why they have a statue of Charles de Gaulle escapes me. Well, Bucharest has lots of beautiful parks, and this is one that I've decided to go through on my way back to my accommodation this afternoon. And you can see on the skyline over there that hotel that I was showing you this morning.